Hello and welcome. In this explainer, we are going to dive deep into solid waste, or, what most of us just call trash. It's a really big deal in environmental science, and my goal is that by the end of this, you'll have a super clear picture of its journey from our hands all the way back into the environment. So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with a huge idea. Could we live in a world without any waste at all? Then we'll get practical and break down the two main types of trash we create. After that, we'll follow the garbage truck to see where it all goes, landfills and incinerators. And to wrap it all up, we'll do a quick hitter recap of all the key points you'll definitely want to remember. All right, let's kick things off with a bit of a thought experiment here in section 1. What if we could have a world without waste? I mean, really think about it. It's a powerful idea that can totally change how we look at trash. And this, right here, this is the core concept we need to grasp. Out in nature, nothing is wasted. Everything is part of a cycle. A leaf falls, it decomposes, and it becomes food for the soil so new things can grow. Nothing is ever really thrown away. Because in nature, there is no away. It's just a perfect, self-contained loop of use and reuse. And this slide really nails the difference. See, nature is all about that cycle. Everything gets returned and repurposed. But us humans, we came up with this idea of solid waste. This concept that some things are just useless or worthless and should be thrown out. It's a straight line in a world that's naturally built on circles. Okay, so now that we've kind of established that waste is really a human invention, let's get a little more specific. In section 2, we're going to break down the two main categories of trash that we actually produce. First, let's get a proper definition on the books. Solid waste is any material we discard that isn't a liquid or a gas. But here's the most important part of that definition. Deemed useless or worthless. That little phrase is key because it's totally subjective. One person's trash is, quite literally, another person's treasure. Okay, so all of this solid waste basically comes from two main places. On one side, you have non-municipal waste. This is all the heavy-duty stuff from factories, farms, and mines. We're talking construction debris, ash, that kind of thing. And on the other side, you have municipal solid waste. This is the everyday trash we all know, the stuff from our homes, our schools, and our offices. Now get ready for this, because the statistic is pretty mind-blowing. When we think about trash, we usually picture our kitchen garbage can, right? Well, all that municipal waste, it only makes up about 1% of all the solid waste in the U.S. A staggering 99% of it comes from those non-municipal sources. That just totally flips the script, doesn't it? It shows that while recycling our soda cans is important, the really big changes have to happen in the industrial world. So let's zoom in on our little 1%, our municipal trash, since that's the stuff we have the most direct control over. So what's in there? Well, as you can see, the biggest piece of the pie by far is paper, making up around 40% of what we throw out. The rest is a mix of things like yard clippings, plastics, old food, and other stuff like metal and glass. All right, so we've defined our trash, we've sorted it into categories. So the next obvious question is, where does it all go? Well, for most of our waste, the answer is the modern version of the dump, which we call a sanitary landfill. A modern sanitary landfill isn't just a big hole in the ground. It's actually a pretty complex, engineered facility. The daily routine is pretty simple. First, the trash gets spread out in thin layers, then giant machines drive back and forth over it, compacting it down to save space. And then, and this is super important, at the end of every day, they cover it all with a fresh layer of soil or plastic. Now, one of the single biggest problems at any landfill is this stuff, leachate. Just think of it as toxic garbage juice. When rain falls and trickles down through all that trash, it picks up all sorts of nasty chemicals. Modern landfills have these special liners and collection pipes specifically designed to capture this leachate before it can get out and cause problems. But even the best designed landfills have some serious issues. Those liners can eventually tear or leak, and if that toxic leachate escapes, it can get into our groundwater, which is a huge problem. As all that organic waste breaks down, it also creates methane gas, which is flammable and a powerful greenhouse gas. And, of course, nobody wants to live next to a landfill, so just finding a place to build a new one is incredibly difficult. So, if landfills are problematic, what's the other big option? Well, that brings us to section 4, turning trash into energy. This is all about the process of incineration, or put simply, burning our trash. The single biggest selling point for incineration is right here,
By burning solid waste, you can reduce its physical volume by around 85%. I mean, that is a massive space saver when you compare it to just piling everything up in a landfill. Now, there are basically two ways to do this. Mass burn incinerators are pretty straightforward. You just dump everything in and burn it all together. The other type is called refuse-derived. This one's a bit more sophisticated. First, you pull out anything that won't burn, like metal and glass, for recycling. Then you take the rest and turn it into these little fuel pellets that burn more cleanly.
So how do you actually get power from this? Well, it works just like a classic power plant. First, you burn the trash to boil a bunch of water. That creates high-pressure steam. The steam is then used to spin the blades of a turbine, and that turbine is hooked up to a generator, which, boom, creates electricity. It's a neat little four-step process.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? Just like landfills, incineration has some major downsides. The burning process can release air pollutants. And even with filters, there's always a risk of releasing tiny amounts of heavy metals and other toxins. Plus, all the ash that's left over, it still has to go to a special landfill. And on top of all that, these places are incredibly expensive to build and run.
All right, we have covered a lot of ground. So now, for our final section, let's just boil it all down to the key takeaways. This is the stuff you'll really want to lock in for any quizzes or presentations you have coming up.
Okay, first, the vocabulary. You've got to know these five. Solid waste, that's our big umbrella term. Municipal waste, that's our everyday trash. Sanitary landfill, the engineered place we bury it. Leachate, that's the toxic garbage juice. And incineration, that's burning it. Got it? Good.
Now, let's put our two main options side by side. Landfills? They're relatively simple and can handle a ton of trash. But the big risk is that leachate, polluting our groundwater. Incineration? It's amazing at reducing volume and it can create energy, but it pollutes the air and costs a fortune. As you can see, there's no perfect answer. It's all about trade-offs. And that brings us right back to where we started. We kicked off this whole explainer with the idea that in nature, there's no such thing as waste. So I'll just leave you with this one question to think about. If we're the ones who invented the whole concept of trash, couldn't we be the ones to uninvent it? How can we start to redesign our systems to work more like that perfect, circular, no-waste cycle we see in the natural world?